Tantor Audio, a division of Recorded Books, presents Blues, Butterflies, and Murder by Loulou Harrington, narrated by Vanessa Daniels. Chapter 1. A bell chimed brightly as the door of the Gilded Lily Antiques and Vintage shop closed behind the departing mother and son, who had just purchased a vintage dinette, solid wood bed frame, and an Elvis poster for the young man's first apartment. Smiling, Jesse Camden, co-owner of the shop in the tea room next door, listened as their footsteps crossed the Victorian home's wooden foyer floor and entered the Gilded Lily tea room and coffee house just in time for brunch. A rustle of movement drew her attention back to her covert study of the man who had been restlessly prowling the aisles of the shop for the last 30 minutes. Jessie couldn't tell if he was an indecisive shopper or someone who was simply killing time and had chosen her business to do his pacing in. Either way, he was hard to ignore. A handsome man in his mid-30s dressed in a somber dark gray business suit and alone in an antique store on a Saturday morning, he was not the average customer. At the moment, he had returned for a third time to a display of hand-painted tennis shoes created by Jessie's friend, Lindsey Hatch, the barista and one of the owners of the tea room across the hallway. As the blonde stranger with electric blue eyes stood transfixed by a pastel green tennis shoe with a trio of white daisies painted across the toe and up the outside, Jessie wondered if she should say something. So far, he had avoided all her attempts to make eye contact and not offered so much as a smile in greeting. In an area where conversation came easily and often, even among strangers, reluctance to disturb a customer wasn't something Jessie was used to. But she remained silent, trying not to stare as he picked up a pale yellow shoe painted with a dark blue and bright yellow swallowtail amid trailing pink morning glories. Other shoes in other colors featured butterflies, ladybugs, and tiny green tree frogs among prairie flowers. As well as the shoes, Lindsey also painted note cards and sold them in the shop and the tea room both. Ceramics, soaps, and candles made by local artisans, plus Jessie's stained glass wind chimes, were all part of the shop's inventory and a big hit with the customers. "These are interesting." Startled by the man's voice, Jessie visibly jerked as he turned toward her with the pale yellow shoe cradled in his palm. "Hand done?" he asked in a tone to match his suit, dark, dominant, and completely lacking the warmth of an Oklahoma twang. Embarrassed to be caught staring while her mind wandered, Jessie tried to hide her discomfort with a smile. "A local artist." She nodded in agreement while her cheeks burned. "Those samples are hand-painted. You pick the design, color, and size you want, and the shoe's done on commission." Without comment or any visible reaction, the stranger replaced the shoe and walked toward the counter where Lindsey's note cards were displayed. His fingers traced the edge of a card with a watercolor of a monarch butterfly perched atop the lacy white flower of a Queen Anne's lace. When he looked up again, the expression in his unsmiling blue gaze was cool and looked more challenging than inquisitive. "These are hers too?" "Yes," Jessie said, feeling her hackles rise. Normally she was more than happy to discuss Lindsey's work, which was distinctive and popular with customers. But this man's awkward social skills were beginning to border on rude. Forcing a smile to her face and a lightness to her voice, Jessie sucked it up and continued. "Charming, aren't they? We're very proud of the artists who sell their crafts here." "Yes, charming." His voice had no inflection, and his stare had all the warmth of a rock. Half a beat later, his lips curled in an imitation smile that wouldn't fool anyone. "I noticed a garden plot in the town square. The sign there looks like the work of the same artist. You said she works on commission?" "The shoes are on commission," Jessie answered, torn between showing her irritation and giving the man a chance. His smile wasn't very convincing, but at least he appeared to be trying, however ineptly. But I never said the artist was a woman. Half the town knew who the artist was, and she didn't know why she felt the need to deny Lindsey's identity. But this whole conversation was becoming uncomfortable. If Jesse and the stranger were playing a game of cat and mouse, she was afraid that she might be the mouse. It's pretty obvious. His shrug seemed to suggest that anyone who painted flowers would naturally be a woman. Men paint flowers too. Jessie lifted her chin in defiance, while the voice of reason reminded her that this man was a customer, and shopkeepers were polite to customers whether the customers deserved it or not. Monet's flower gardens are known around the world, and Van Gogh's sunflowers. Clamping her jaw shut, she stopped the flow of words before she could go on listing every male artist who'd ever painted a landscape. But this artist. The man with the ice-blue eyes thumped a card with his fingertip. This artist is a woman. He leaned in against the counter. A local woman, did you say? The artist is local, I said. Is there something specific I can help you with, sir? Tamping down her temper, Jessie let her words slow and her tone grow mellow while she exaggerated her Oklahoma accent with just a twist of Texas drawl. This man's interest seemed much more focused on Lindsey herself than on her artwork, and his attitude was starting to set Jessie's teeth on edge. She would never be deliberately rude, but she might be willing to make an exception in this case. I'd like to meet the artist, he insisted. Then he smiled again, with a slow, determined show of perfect white teeth. If a snake ever smiled at her, Jessie was sure it would look exactly like he did in that moment. If you have a business card, I'd be happy to pass it along, she said, suppressing a cringe. When I see the artist, but I can't promise when that will be. I meant today. His eyes looked more than ever like glittering ice. When he leaned in, Jessie realized that he was taller than she had noticed. She was not a short woman, and even with the counter between them, she felt that he was looming over her. I'm terribly sorry, but this artist only stops by periodically, Jessie answered with smooth sincerity. She had a bad habit of blushing when telling a deliberate lie, and the last thing she wanted was to show weakness in front of a man who used his size to intimidate anyone, especially a woman. If you'd like to leave a business card, I'll pass it on. That's the best I can do. His eyes narrowed, and the muscles along his jaw bulged. Resentment simmered in his gaze as he looked at her waiting hand. Then he took a step away from the counter. I don't have one with me, but I'll be back. He left without a backward glance. Despite the merry tinkle of the chime as the door slammed behind him, his simple words lingered like a threat in the chill air after his departure. Jessie watched him cross the foyer of the first grand home of Myrtle Grove, built by the town's original banker. She watched as the shop's worst customer ever exited the oversized front door. Jessie left the counter and crossed to the front window, where she saw him pass two women on the wide front porch. The women proceeded through the front door into the foyer, while the man descended the front steps onto the sidewalk. While voices filled the quiet, and the sound of heels echoed on the wood floors of the foyer, Jessie watched the man exit the gate at the end of the sidewalk. A moment later, the French door into the antique shop opened to the merry tinkle of the bell overhead. Well, good morning, Jessie, a woman greeted. Hello, ladies. With a last glance out the window, Jessie gave up on watching the man's departure and decided to trust that he was truly gone. She turned and found Susan Carter just inside the shop's doorway. Although it's closer to afternoon now, isn't it? Amy Carter, Susan's sister-in-law, followed her in and closed the door. Smiling at two of the shop's most regular customers, Jessie dropped the curtain on the window and gave the new arrivals her full attention. Are you looking for anything in particular? We got our pick of a lovely estate last week. There's a Craftsman period oak dining table and some wonderful armoires that I know you haven't seen. As she talked, Jessie ushered the ladies to the far side of the room, where dividers were set up to create smaller rooms within what had once been the living room and parlor of the home that had belonged to Jesse's grandfather. The antiques shop occupied one full side of the downstairs, and across the foyer, a tea room occupied what had once been the kitchen, dining room, and outside screened porch. "The new pieces start halfway down this aisle and go all the way back to the corner," Jessie explained. Amy craned her neck, looking around. "Connie's not here?" "She's staging a house for Matt today," Jessie said, referring to Constance Oliver, co-owner of the antique shop. "She'll be back before closing, or sooner if she needs to borrow something else from the store." "Oh, that Connie's such a talent," Susan gushed. "She's got such style." Then she fell silent and glanced toward Jessie. "Not that you don't have style too, dear." Jessie laughed, grateful to have a business partner who enjoyed doing the things Jessie herself didn't. "Relax, Susan. Grandpa taught me everything he knew about refinishing furniture, and my grandmother Sadie taught me how to bake. But it's no secret that Connie's the decorator around here." "You make a good team," Amy said generously. "That we do." Jessie could fix a broken table or recover a chair, but she left picking the fabrics or arranging a display to Connie, who also ran the shop most days while Jessie worked across the hall in the tea room. A muffled sound followed by a whisper of movement caught the corner of Jessie's eye, but when she turned toward the side of the room closest to the entrance, she saw nothing. "Well, you all go on and look around. I've got some tidying up to do." With that, Jessie left them to wander among the newly acquired antiques, while she crossed to the aisle nearest the entry. Nothing but her imagination should be stirring among the cubicles that were arranged in vignettes, with a reading area containing a desk, books, and a lady's chaise on one side of the aisle, across from a vanity table arranged with crystal perfume bottles, a sterling silver toiletry set, and an elegant draping of pearls on the other. Halfway down the narrow corridor, Jessie passed into the third set of improvised rooms, created by a tall hutch on one side of the walkway and an armoire on the other. Pausing in her march down the aisle, she quickly scanned a breakfast room scene that was made up of the hutch, a sideboard, and open shelves forming three sides, with a pine table and chairs in the center. Seeing nothing out of place, she turned to examine the oak tallboy, a serpentine oak dresser and its mirror, and finally the matching armoire with drawers down one side and double doors for hanging clothes on the other. Facing the oversized wardrobe, Jessie stopped and stared. It was a small thing, but the main door on the right that overlapped the inner door on the left was ajar. Not sure what she would find, but somehow sure she would find something. Jessie swung open the outer door, peered into the dark interior, and found herself staring into the wide eyes of a cowering Lindsey Hatch. Chapter 2. Jessie took a step back, stunned. Her mouth opened, but no sound came out. In the first place, she had never seen Lindsey cower. Ever. Before this moment, Jessie would have sworn it wasn't possible, and as much as she wanted to demand an explanation, she couldn't find the words. As Lindsey pressed an index finger to her lips for silence, she reached out with her other hand and motioned Jessie closer. "What?" was all Jessie got out before Lindsey shook her head fiercely and released a low, hissing shush. "Hide me," Lindsey whispered, not saying the words aloud so much as mouthing them, slowly and urgently. Leaning in toward the interior, Jessie saw tears running down Lindsey's cheeks and was stunned a second time. Tears were something else Lindsey Hatch never did, and Jessie suddenly knew it had something to do with the strange man who'd been in the shop, examining Lindsey's artwork just minutes earlier. "This is not the place," Jessie whispered back and indicated the armoire with a motion of her hand. "Well, duh," Lindsey said impatiently. Jessie almost laughed, instantly cheered by the sudden show of Lindsey-like tartness. Then a tear slipped silently from the corner of the younger woman's dark, desperate eyes, and Jesse realized that whatever or whoever Lindsey was hiding from had her terrified. "My apartment?" Jesse suggested in the almost soundless whisper Lindsey had used. Lindsey's headshake was quick and harsh. "I can't risk the stairs." In a burst of inspiration, Jesse nodded, took Lindsey's arm, and urged her out of the armoire. Lindsey pulled away, and Jesse tried again. After a few seconds of tug-of-war, Jesse managed to guide the other woman out of her crouch inside the wardrobe and onto the creaky wood floor of the antique shop. In the distance, Jesse could hear Amy and Susan's voices murmuring on the far side of the room, but there was no other sound. Taking Lindsey by the hand, Jesse led her back toward the front of the shop until they reached the area with the vanity. To the side of the vanity was a Victorian lady's chair covered in blue velvet, and behind that was a folding screen, opened and draped with a vintage dressing gown and boa. Jesse slipped behind the screen, opened a door in the wall, pulled Lindsey inside with her, and shut the door behind them. "Don't move." With that warning, Jesse felt her way toward where a low-wattage camping light sat on a shelf. Picking up the lamp, she switched it on and turned around to see Lindsey gazing in wonder at the closet-sized storeroom tucked into the space under the staircase. One door opened into the storeroom from the shop, and another door opened from the entry hall behind the staircase. That door was kept locked from the inside, and most people never noticed it was there. "Really?" Lindsey asked in a whisper. "How long has this been here?" "Since the house was built. It was my favorite room when I was a kid. That door opens into the hallway." Jesse pointed toward the back corner on the opposite wall. "The deadbolt unlocks from the inside. When the coast is clear, you can scoot up the stairs and into my apartment. I'll be up when I can." "Don't you want to know what this is about?" From the dread in Lindsey's voice, it obviously wasn't something she was ready to talk about. "There was a guy in here a little while ago," Jesse answered. "He was looking at the shoes you painted and asking questions." Lindsey threw back her head and emitted a sound that was half moan, half trapped animal. "We can talk later," was all Jesse said. "Keep both doors locked until you hear me rap on the wall. Then go out the hall door and up the stairs. You'll be safe in my apartment until we get all the customers out of here and everything locked up." "Thank you." Lindsey gave Jesse a quick hug, and without thinking, Jesse hugged her back. Two women who never hugged, locked in a silent promise in a dimly lit closet. When Jesse slipped out the door, she heard the deadbolt slide into place behind her. From across the store came the murmur of voices as she stepped around the screen and into the open. Straightening her shoulders, she shook off the cold chills that clung to her and started toward the cash register. The stranger who had sent Lindsey into hiding was gone, and whatever had Lindsey so frightened could be straightened out once they had a nice, long talk. "Oh, Jesse, dear." Amy's voice sent Jesse hurrying to the front counter. An instant behind her voice, Amy reappeared from the back of the store with Susan a few steps behind. "I do love that new armoire you were telling me about," Amy said as Jesse slid into place behind the cash register. "It's smaller than the other one you have in here. Can I give you a down payment and have you hold it for me until I can arrange to have my nephew pick it up?" "Well, sure. I don't think I've seen Mike since you bought that sideboard in here. How's he doing?" "Oh, he's getting so big. I can't tell you how handy it is to have a nephew on the football team." Amy giggled and gave Susan a nudge with her elbow. "Why, there's nothing he and a couple of his buddies can't move." Easy for her to say. As mother of the nephew under discussion, Susan gave an exaggerated roll of her eyes. "Amy's not having to feed him and all his buddies. Do you know how much a teenage boy can eat?" "We get a few of the football boys in for lunch on Sundays," Jesse said, laughing. "Mom always puts a little extra on their plates." And good heavens, can they eat the pie? That's what I'm talking about, Susan agreed. She set a carved wood serving tray piled high with odds and ends onto the counter. So, what's the damage? Jesse started ringing up the charges. 1 soup ladle, picture frame, and brass candlestick at a time, wrapping them in newspaper and stacking them into sacks. Amy reappeared with the price tag from the armoire, and Jesse wrote up the sale and the down payment for that. Just as things were beginning to seem normal again, and she had almost forgotten the image of Lindsey sitting on the storeroom's one stool in the dim yellow light of a lantern. The bell on the door chimed, and in walked the man who was beginning to seem like Myrtle Grove's newest nightmare. Amy and Susan both turned to look and emitted little hum-ums that didn't sound nearly as negative as Jessie felt. She shifted her gaze from the man to the 2 women, who seemed suddenly feminine and fluttery. Jessie looked at the man again. It was the same one who had been in earlier, but something about him seemed different. Reluctantly, she recalled that when she had first seen him, she had thought him passably attractive. Wow, what a hunk, had been her first thought to be exact, but that impression hadn't lasted. Now, as he nodded toward the other 2 customers with something close to a real smile, he was almost charming. Amy and Susan both reacted with grins and giggles. 2 women approaching middle age, one happily married and the other widowed, and they both were nearly simpering. "Hi there," Jessie said, refusing to be suckered by his new, friendlier attitude. "You're back." He gifted her with his almost genuine smile. "I've decided to place an order for a pair of those shoes." He pointed toward the sample tennis shoes that Lindsey had painted. "Oh, they're wonderful," Susan said. She held out a foot, at the end of which was a white tennis shoe looped with a yellow sulfur butterfly, green vines, and purple morning glories. "I've had these for 6 months, and they still look like new. You can toss them into the washing machine, and the paint is untouched. You won't be sorry you bought a pair." She stopped talking and batted her lashes. "Are they for your wife?" He leaned in slightly toward Susan and winked. "For a friend." Susan and Amy both dissolved into another round of giggles. Jessie felt a tug of doubt quickly followed by disgust when she remembered the tears that had seeped from Lindsey's terrified eyes. Whoever this man was, and whatever history he had with Lindsey, he was not the man he was pretending to be for the sake of the other customers. "Well, Amy, you just let me know when Mike will be in to pick up that armoire." Jessie held out the 2 packages filled with odds and ends that had been passed down from generation to generation and family to family until they had found their way into the Gilded Lily Antiques and Vintage shop. One of Jessie's greatest satisfactions was to see items headed back out to begin a new cycle, creating new memories in a new home. Amy tore her gaze away from the man who had yet to introduce himself and took the smaller package Jessie held out to her. "Oh, yes, certainly. I'll do that." Amy's eyes turned back toward the man, and her lashes batted like a coquette's. "So nice meeting you." He smiled and dipped his head in acknowledgement. Jessie could feel his impatience simmering beneath the surface, but she knew the other 2 women were still under his spell. "My daughter has a pair of pink daisies," Susan added. She wiggled her foot at him again for emphasis. "Coneflowers," Jessie corrected automatically. Lindsey painted her shoes with a lot of the flowers that grew wild along the Oklahoma roadsides. Coneflowers were among the most common. "Same thing," Susan answered as she smiled meltingly up at him. "They look just like pink daisies. They're real cute. You might think about something like that." Jessie bit her tongue. Daisies were white. Coneflowers were pink, at least the ones growing wild, and a black-eyed Susan was yellow. And they weren't the same thing at all, but she wasn't going to argue with a customer, especially about something that most people paid no attention to. I'll do that, he agreed. He smiled again, and Susan and Amy all but puddled at his feet. Emitting giggles worthy of preteens, the ladies left the shop, and Jessie watched them go, while wondering if that's how Lindsey felt when she first met him. If he had been her Prince Charming once upon a time, before something changed, and Lindsey was left cowering in a closet rather than face him. Echinacea sounds good to me, he said when he and Jessie were alone. Maybe a dark pink on a lighter pink shoe. A man of hidden depths, Jessie answered, reluctantly impressed that he knew the true name of the common coneflower. She really resented finding something about him to like. Do you garden? My mother did. She liked prairie flowers as much as English roses. His voice softened and a shadow passed behind his eyes. Me too. Jessie felt a chink give way in her armor. Drat. But what was she to do when the man obviously thought of his mother when he thought of flowers? That corner flower bed in the town square. The sign says it's maintained by the Myrtle Grove Garden Club. Would the members happen to include you among them? Guilty. Feeling herself lulled by the pleasant conversation, Jessie began to miss the jerk who had been in her shop earlier. She didn't want any part of this man to be nice. And the person who made that sign in the corner garden, would she happen to be a member of that garden club as well? His tone was still pleasant, but Jessie recognized the return of the jerk when she heard it. She was not going to discuss Lindsey with him, especially after seeing her friend cowering in tears. Jessie met his gaze with a flat, unwelcoming stare. Are you going to order those shoes? His eyes turned cold, but he answered without hesitation. Size 7.5. She pulled out an order pad and repeated the order as she wrote. Light pink tennis shoes, size 7.5, deep pink echinacea. She glanced up. A little greenery? I'll leave that to the artist's discretion. $25 is the standard down payment. Another $25's due when you pick them up. He opened his wallet, pulled out some bills, and laid 2 10s and a 5 on the counter. Disappointed that he wasn't using a credit card, or better yet, a check, Jessie slid the bills under the order pad. Your name and phone number? I'll be in next week. That should allow plenty of time for the order to be filled. He stepped back and turned toward the door. Wait! She was not letting him walk out of the shop a second time without getting at least a minimum of personal information. I need a name at least, and a phone number. I need a phone number in case we have a question, or I can give you the other $25 now if that would make you feel better, he offered. One corner of his mouth turned up in what just missed being a smirk. He had her flustered, and they both knew it. Being a junior grade control freak herself, Jessie recognized it when she saw it in someone else, and this guy had it bad. Everything with him seemed to be a tug of war and a competition for power that was covered by a veneer of civility. He was practically stalking Lindsey, but in a quiet, polite way that made Jessie feel paranoid for suspecting him. Okay, fine. Jessie held out her hand for the money. Why don't you do that? I'll hold the shoes for a month after they're done. If you don't show up, I know a couple of people who wear size 7.5 and would be happy for a free pair of shoes. Anybody ever tell you you've got a smart mouth on you? He pulled out his wallet, counted out another $25, and held the money out to her. He was just far enough away that Jessie had to lean over the counter toward him to reach the end of the bills. She half expected him to pull them away, but he didn't. Instead, he moved half a step closer as she took the bills from his hand. Staring at her mouth, he added, It's a pretty mouth, though. Be a shame if someone had to shut it for you. Fear washed through Jessie like ice water, and she shuddered. A cold smile slid over her face, stopping short of his icy blue eyes. When he turned on his heel and walked...
Sample complete. Ready to continue?